Welcome back, whisky fans. When I was doing my videos for the Bunnahabhain Fusilier 2022 samples that I bought, I mentioned that I'd bought something else from the Bunnahabhain website that wasn't a Fusilier release, but it was something that I wanted to get something good from Bunnahabhain because they make fantastic whisky, and I wanted to get something that would show the distillery in all of its glory. So it's time to have a look at what I got. So this is it's a small batch release, limited edition from Bunnahabhain, and this is Bunnahabhain Moine 2004. So Moine, or Moine some people say, it's another word, it's another name for peated Bunnahabhain. So it's going to be similar to Stoischer and Toychuk and all of those weird and wonderful Gallic names that Bunnahabhain have for their peated stuff. Now, Moine is kind of all over the place. It varies a lot batch by batch and year by year. Sometimes it's really expensive, sometimes it's affordable, sometimes it's very, very young. You get it matured in a huge range of different cask types. Sometimes it's a bit on the young, fierce and quite rough side. And just my opinion, I think that peated Bunnahabhain is quite often full of character, but a little bit odd. But this one here, this one isn't young. This is a 2004 vintage Moine Pedro Ximinez Cask finish, and it's 17 years old. It's bottled at 51.8% ABV, it's natural colour and non-chill filtered, and this is bottle number 902 out of 1,270 bottles, so it really is quite a small batch. So sadly there is a chance that if any of you want to get hold of a bottle of this, you might be disappointed because it's going to sell out quickly. But Bunnahabhain, to their credit, they're constantly doing these new special small batch releases, so I'm sure that whenever you see this video and whenever you want one, there'll probably be something there for you. Now, the reason why I went for this one is because, in my opinion, being a Pedro Ximinez cask finished whisky, it's slightly less wacky and out there than the Fis releases, basically. Because in the Fis releases we had a Calvados finish, which I was really excited about before I actually tried some more of these new Calvados whiskies, but I'm kind of forming an opinion now that perhaps Calvados is a bit too heavy-handed for whisky to really show the quality of the distiller. It seems that little bit too much. And to be fair, I have said that a lot of times about PX casks as well. I think that PX, obviously being very sweet, obviously being one of the sweetest types of sherry, it too can be very heavy-handed, and especially if you've got a little bit of a light anemic base whisky to apply it to, it can really take over and mute a lot of the other finer points of the whisky. But in my opinion, Bunnahabhain is not a light and anemic whisky. In my opinion, Bunnahabhain quite often takes Pedro Ximinez casks really, really well. I think that it goes really well with their style of whisky. And the fact that with this one that we know that it's not a quick flavour dip, it's a 17-year-old whisky and it's spent those last 5 years in that Pedro Ximinez cask. So it's not a quick flavour dip, it's had time to marry and integrate and get some proper flavours from that cask, rather than just the sherry that's left in that cask. Another thing that you've always got to be careful about with special releases is this is a 700ml bottle, 70 centilitres. But, and I don't know if you'll be able to see the fill level there, but I have to keep checking that this one's not a 500 because it goes down really bloody quickly. Before we get into the nosing and tasting, I do have to mention the price on this one. This is one of the more, not most expensive, but one of the more pricey Moine releases. I paid £160 for this, which, I'll be perfectly honest with you, is more than I'd normally ever spend on a bottle of whisky. That's a hell of a lot of money, but I just wanted to get something special, something older, high strength, something that I can really get excited about, and hopefully this is going to be that. So I must admit that I did kind of pay a bit of a premium to get something that is hopefully a bit special, which is okay now and again. So let's get some in the glass, see what it's like. So normally when you get a whisky which is that colour, I'm sure you know what I mean, when you get a whisky that looks like that, normally us seasoned whisky aficionados kind of jump to the conclusion it's going to be an unnaturally coloured whisky. It's going to have a a crap ton of caramel colouring in there, but we know from the label of this one that it is natural colour. That is just the colour that a whisky comes out of a cask after 17 years, when one of those casks is a PX wine cask. So Bunnahabhain 2004, Moine on the nose. So unsurprisingly, the first note that I'm getting on this one, heavy sherry. Lots of those notes that you'd associate with Bunnahabhain and with well done PX finished whisky. So quite chocolatey, milk and dark chocolate, getting some lovely raisins in there, some caramel, interesting note of pear. Also getting some cherries, fresh cherries, a nice waxiness, as well as a dry, earthy, peppery peat. It's actually easy when you first nose this one to forget that it is a peated whisky, because even though it is reasonably heavily peated and the peat is still intact there, the sherry is just so intense that it almost matches the peat for intensity, which doesn't happen all that often. It's a very well integrated flavour profile as well. Quite often, a lot of people aren't a fan of peated sherried whiskies, and I get that. I understand why a lot of people shy away from the style, because quite often it clashes or one overpowers the other, and it quite often just doesn't work. But in this one, really does. I think you can also tell that there's been some really good, proper, peppery European oak gone into this one. It's a pleasant nuttiness, walnuts, almonds, fruitcake, so all of those fruity notes, the sweetness and the nuttiness, gives you something like fruitcake on the nose. Quite a coffee note on the nose as well. And it's not an incredibly harsh, bitter coffee, it's more like a milky cappuccino. And as always, I'm pleased to say that there's a lovely maltiness on the nose of this one. Lots of notes of old malt, as well as some really nice polished wood. So, beautiful nose. Let's see how it tastes. Beautiful whisky. So on the palate, first of all, as with the nose, sherry, but again it's well integrated and extremely well balanced, and it's that kind of properly done sherry finished whisky where you don't just get lots of sweetness and grape notes. It's much more complex than that, getting lots of lovely sort of leather armchair waxiness, and again some more slightly bitter cherries. Kind of reminds me of that bitter cherry flavoured medicine that you might have had as a kid. And again, lots of old maltiness on the palate of this one to back up that well matured age that we got on the nose. Really nice oranginess. So this kind of reminds me of like premium orange juice, not the kind of watery from concentrate cheap stuff that you can get, but proper premium orange juice. Lovely honeyed maltiness, kind of like honeycomb on the palate, as well as on the late palate, lots of milk chocolate notes and lovely maltiness. One more sip and we'll look at the finish. So on the finish, it's a long finish, lots of that earthy peppery peat again, lots of chocolatiness, cherry, raisin, but really nice lingering notes from the sherry and the peat on the finish. It's very tempting with whiskies like this, and I kind of cringe at myself when I say this, but it really brings to mind the term old-fashioned, and I say that because I don't really know why people use that phrase for these whiskies, but it's easy to imagine this style, especially with the peat and the really nice leathery, nutty, sweet sherry style of maturation. It's really easy to imagine that this is what really good Scotch was like 100 years ago. Whether or not it was, hard to say, because not many of us are going to have the privilege of trying those old-fashioned whiskies. But whether it is or not, it's definitely an excellent balance of that malt and the peat, the European oak and the sherry. So as for a grade for this whisky, going to go with an A. Just goes to show that you don't need these fancy, extremely expensive £400 Fissila releases to get great whisky. And I think in this case, compared to the 3 Fiss releases from Bunnahabhain this year at £90, £200 and £400, I think that you actually get much better whisky from avoiding them and just going for one of the small batch special releases. In particular, yes, this is expensive. Yes, it's probably a little bit overpriced, because personally I feel like £160 is too much for any whisky, but this offers much better quality and better value than that £400 Calvados finish that we got this year from Bunna. I'd also say, and this is a bit unfair because it's more expensive, but I think this is a better high strength presentation of Bunnahabhain than the 12 cask strength. Now that is unfair because the 12 cask strength is about half the price of this one. But like I said, unpopular opinion, I said in my review of the 12 cask strength that I do feel that at just 12 years old, that high ABV is kind of wasted on the Bunnahabhain 12. I do think that 46.3% is enough to show the full flavours available in the 12, and me personally, I thought that adding some water to it to knock it back down towards sort of like 50% was probably the right thing to do. But with this one here, I do think there is a point. I don't actually know if 51.8% is full cask strength on this one. I've got a sneaking suspicion that it's not. They probably have watered this down a bit, but that high strength is really appreciated, and it definitely allows the flavours that you've got in this 17-year-old whisky to really shine. Compared to those other Fess releases that we got from Bunnahabhain this year, I think that it's a much more predictable, and you know what you're getting. It's easier to know what to expect from this than that £200 Tokay cask. I think that with this one, because it's a more traditional, sort of almost safer option for a high age statement, high ABV, cask finished Bunnahabhain, I think that the peat shows better in this one. It just plays that little bit better with the Pedro Ximinez cask than it did with that sweet Hungarian white wine cask. And it also has to be said that this is £40 cheaper than that Tokay wine cask, even though you're getting a similar ABV. So my opinion on the Fiss bottles, because you kind of have to look at this one as a special edition non-Fiss whisky coming out at the same time as those special edition Fiss bottles for a lot of money. You kind of have to compare them. And to be honest, I said when I started doing the Fiss sample reviews that I'd never bought a whole bottle of Fissila whisky from Bunnahabhain, because it always just seems like you're getting ripped off that little bit too much. And I think after trying these 4 whiskies, my opinion of Bunnahabhain and Bunnahabhain Fiss hasn't changed. Bunnahabhain is an amazing, fantastic distillery that you can really rely on, but I think that their Fiss bottlings are bloody expensive, and you're probably better off going with the normal stuff. And I think that's a strange circumstance, really, because when you look at the core range products from Bunnahabhain, they all seem to be really reasonably priced. I haven't checked the prices lately, but you can get a bottle of the 12, which is a fantastic craft presented whisky, for £40, less than £40, something like that. Even the Styradar is great. The 18 from Bunnahabhain now is a little bit on the pricey side. It's more expensive than your other distilled products like the Deanston and the Tobermory 18, but at just over £100, that's a reasonably fair, realistic price to ask for an 18-year-old whisky. I do think that these Fiss bottlings from Bunnahabhain, they're probably more collector's pieces than actual bottles of whisky. When you look at this Moine release though, as I said, at £160, it is kind of the upper end of what I think they should really be realistically asking for us to pay for something that we're going to drink. I think that there needs to be an upper limit to how much us whisky drinkers are going to pay for something that we're going to drink and it's going to be gone, because it's easy to get carried away and we're all guilty of it. But with this one, I don't feel ripped off. It pains me to say this, but it kind of justifies that £160 price tag. I think so. Although, and this is something that we all need to bear in mind, it's not essential to pay £160 to get great whisky. But as we all know, the price of entry for really great whisky is going up and up these days. So let me know your thoughts on this one and Bunnahabhain Moine releases, whatever ones you've tried, and what do you think about the constantly increasing prices that we have to pay for good whiskey? Because even the cheaper stuff is more expensive than it used to be, and it doesn't really seem like it's slowing down. Thanks for watching, and cheers.